Welcome to our weekly Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion podcast. My name is Pam Noble, Managing Partner at the Christopher Group and the lead for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Engagement practice. One of the primary reasons we conduct these podcasts is to educate others on the many facets of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm honored to welcome Stephen Brown. Stephen is the VP of Diversity and Inclusion at Molson Coors Beverage Company, where he is responsible for ensuring the execution of the company's D&I strategy across the business. He works closely with the senior leadership team while partnering with the organization to ensure that the right tools, resources, programs, and processes for diversity and inclusion advancements are aligned to the recruitment, leadership, and employee development, engagement, and retention. At this time, I'd like to welcome Steve.
Hi, Pam.
So, Stephen, we've had an opportunity to really kind of delve into this space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the things that I would really like to start off the conversation with is you recently changed roles. And with all the emphasis now on diversity, equity, and inclusion, what was it about this role that enticed you?
What's interesting is I actually changed roles even before the last 5 months came about. I was just ready for my next level opportunity. And the new role in Molson Coors came about. An interesting piece about Molson Coors is it's based here in my hometown, and there was a mass shooting that happened at the company on February 26th, which was 2 days before my last day with GE Healthcare. And this opportunity came about that they were looking to create a new role. I think because I had worked at a version of this company in the past, and it happened in my hometown. This is probably one of the first times in my career that really my head and my heart kind of connected when it came to my career choice. I just felt like if I could help them recover and heal from this tragedy, then I wanted to play a role there, and just recognizing that some of the things happening within the organization, I think they were really ready to take it to the next level as they thought about their overall D&I strategy.
And so what does taking it to the next level mean for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. The company found itself really going from Miller Coors to Molson Coors. And so in some cases, finance identity there. They moved our headquarters from Denver to Chicago and to Milwaukee. But we also have this long legacy associated with being a Miller Brewing Company. And so it was just about not only identifying who we are, I think people also got lost. And you found some people who were at the company, left the company, you had new people coming in. And so it was really about just figuring out how to, one, recover from this tragedy that happened, and how that impacts the shooter and the 5 victims were all employees of the organization. How do you start to kind of look at that and become whole again? How do you then, think about how does this look in regards to your culture? How does it look in regards to being not okay with what happened and wanting to deal with the employees and employees' families while also running the business? And so really kind of taking it to the next level was how do you look at our current culture and saying, how do we heal from this? And one of the things that when I'm doing very early in my tenure is looking at a culture assessment, looking at our entire process from wing to wing, both on a behavior basis, the climate, how are people feeling, and then also in regards to our processes on wing to wing. Now, are there things that we can do differently, better? What are the opportunities that we can look at ourselves and say, this is how we are now, but we also have the strategies, the roadmap, this journey to your point, kind of get better and to the next level. How do we do that? And so it was really being able to kind of pause, look at where we are, and then move advancing the culture in the new organization.
Now, during some of our conversations, we often talk about what comes first, diversity or inclusion. It's that chicken and egg. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I love this question because you and I did talk about it. What I love about it is sometimes people will say, what comes first, diversity or inclusion? And our title tends to be diversity and inclusion, right? And so it's both. But if we had to kind of look at from an organization, when I think about diversity, in some ways it's about representation. And that's extremely important. And I don't want to sideline that because ultimately you need to make sure that your organization does have representatives from the various groups. As an employee, I want to feel like I belong. I want to feel like my voice matters. I want to feel like I can be who I am who I want to be, right? And so ultimately, I don't think that diversity drives inclusion, because inclusion is about this culture, the sense of belonging, the sense of engagement. But if you do inclusion well, if you do inclusion in a thoughtful way, if you do inclusion not as because it's good intentions, but you're very intentional about what inclusion looks like in your organization, that can drive representation. That will drive people to, what I love about when I think about representation is beyond representation, it's also about retention. It's about growth. It's around development. And so I think inclusion has all those pieces involved that if I had to kind of force to put in order, do inclusion really well and diversity will follow. Be really intentional about what this looks like. Be really intentional in regards to how do you tap into that piece that employees are looking for as it relates to, even though it's diversity and inclusion, again, if I had to put in order, I would say inclusion and diversity, but by the way, you should focus on both of them at the same time.
Now, one of the things that you and I talked about in this space is what kind of critical conversations need to happen in order to make sure that inclusion actually takes place?
Honest conversations that really do happen. There was a period of time that you just didn't necessarily talk about politics in the workplace. You didn't talk about race in the workplace. In some ways, you kind of kept the outside world from coming inside the organization. And we thought, in that case, then everyone should be fine because no emotions would be heard if you kind of keep the outside from coming inside. Well, we recognize that's not even realistic. And that happened. And so it was a little bit of a bent-up frustration in regards to, how employees spoke to one another, how managers spoke to employees, how the organization spoke to the organization. And really what we had discovered, particularly when you put this global pandemic that we're all facing, and then on top of that, while we were still in the midst of that, then you put on the social justice unrest that all of us experienced, not just in the U.S., but beyond the U.S. And when you combine those two, and many of us were working from home in an environment that we weren't, used to working for. You put all that, and then you ask employees to be okay, act normal. Let's not have those conversations about what's happening. And that's not real. That's not realistic. And so what we found, many companies as well, what we found is being very intentional about these conversations. First of all, having conversations. And then the interesting thing about when you have a conversation, the first thing you have to do in this conversation is actively listen. And so we held a number of listening sessions of our employees who were feeling this heaviness that most of us had never felt before. Then if I go back to how you and I began this conversation, Pam, so for us, it was the pandemic, it was the social unrest. But remember, we were still in a healing process from this mass shooting. So we just became so much more intentional about having these conversations and, frankly, also helping our organization on how to have these conversations. Sometimes we take it for granted that people know how to talk to one another and people know how to deal with it. And that's not the case. And we also found that some employees didn't even know, even where to start. So we just tried to put a number of forums together of having these listening conversations. It goes back to the overall conversation about inclusion. How to help people be where they are and help them along the way. I talk a lot about when you have these conversations, it's a spectrum of where people are and their reaction to it. One, you want to make sure that everyone's on this spectrum and you understand where they are and you kind of help them move through it. So we just held a number across the organization. We literally paused for one day. We had a listening session with the employees. And by the way, it was all optional if you wanted to speak, but we asked that everyone listen. And that just stirred more and more of forums that people want to say, this is pretty powerful. In fact, it became pretty emotional, but I want to hold more of these. And so we're finding ourselves how to incorporate this into how we work every day.
One thing about your organization is its strong values, and that's really focused on community, celebration, and belonging. How do you do that and continue to embed it while you're remote? Well, I'd love to thank you for your time today. I think you've given us a lot of information that people can take back and use in their organization. And as you said, it's really about being inquisitive and how do you learn and continue to push the initiative forward, because the reality is what works in one company won't work in another. So all your insight has been invaluable, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you, Pam. I appreciate you asking me to be part of this dialogue.